Hello and welcome to Property Investment Blueprint. In today's episode, I'm going to share the biggest housing law changes in Wales. But before we get going, if you like this video or any of my videos, don't forget to hit the like button below, subscribe to my channels for more of these amazing tutorials. So the Wales government have decided to literally unravel the whole housing laws within Wales, and this only impacts Wales, by the way. So these are the biggest changes of the housing law in Wales for decades. Apparently it is to increase protection for the tenants, licenses, and clarify their right and responsibility. And landlord will require now to replace the existing tenancy agreement to a contract called occupation contract. So what are the two contracts? There are two different contracts they're going to implement. This come into effect on the 22nd of July 2022. The two types of contract are secure contract. Bear with me here because I might be reading from the actual government website itself so that I get you the information or the summary you require, because this is going to be a life-changing moment for most of the landlords, okay? Very important for us to understand this because it's literally coming to effect in less than 5 months. So we need to prepare ourselves so you understand what it is and where you invest in to make sure you know what you're really getting into. So the number one type of contract is secure contract. Basically, this replaces secure tenancies issued by your local authority, like if you live in Cardiff, Newport, places like that, and then and assorted tenancy issued by the social landlords. Some landlords are there registered under the Social Housing Act to provide houses for vulnerable people. And the other type of contract is standard contract. This is basically a contract that private landlords would use. Who are the private landlords? People that rent their properties as flats to normal people. They rent their houses to normal people. So basically, the landlords are required to actually use a standard contract, which is now going to be called occupation contract. So we're required to issue that sort of contract. This is a default contract for private landlords, basically, but can be also used by the local authorities and RSLs in certain circumstances. Okay, so again, what does this mean to landlords, people that are looking to invest in Wales, or current landlords, or really people that are just looking to invest with property investors or landlords in Wales? So what the government in Wales is claiming, basically, they're saying the actual impacts to landlord or the benefits to landlord is basically a simpler system with two types of contract, which I've just highlighted there, which is the social rented contract, and obviously we've got the standard contract. And they're also saying it is ensuring homes are fit for human habitation. And this will include basically, instead of having 5 years electrical certificate, they maybe require you to do electrical testing every year to ensure smoke alarms are working, to ensure the carbon monoxide detector is also fitted rightly and it's in full working condition. And also they are also claiming this would help landlords to repossess properties that have been abandoned by the tenant for over 4 weeks without needing a court order to repossess the property. So basically, the 4 types of terms that can be featured in this occupation contract, which would replace the current tenancy agreement and license agreement that we issue to our tenants. So there is got 4 components that needs to be included for it to be a solidified occupation contract. So the number one thing we need to be included there, basically, it needs to have key matters included in it. What does that mean? The name of both parties, i.e. the name of the landlord, the name of the tenants or tenant that living in the properties, the exact address of the property needs to be in the contract so everybody can see the exact property that this contract will relate to. And the number 2 things also that will be included in this contract will be fundamental terms. What that means, basically, cover the most important aspect of the contract, including possession procedures and the landlord's obligation regarding repair and maintenance. So that's the fundamental. That literally is the key terms that you need to input in that contract. And the other thing also they've included there is supplementary terms, which deals with the more practical day-to-day matters applying to the occupation contract. For example, the requirement for a contract holder, which is now the tenant, to notify the landlord if the property is going to be empty for 4 weeks or more. Basically, this allows the landlord to know whether their property is empty or not, or what they need to do to ensure the property is safe while the tenant is away. The final term is additional terms, they call it. This addresses any other specifically agreed terms within the contract. For example, a term which relates to keeping pets. Say if you encourage people to bring pets in your properties, this would also be added in there. And any additional term that must be fair. They say in any additional they're saying any additional term must be fair as required by the Consumer Right Act 2015. As a landlord, you will require to issue a written statement, which is now the contract of the occupation contract, to all contract holders. Basically, if you currently have tenants in your properties, you as a landlord will require to issue a written statement of the occupation contract to all your current contract holders. The contract holders are the tenants, basically. This will replace your current tenancy or license agreement. The written statement must contain all terms of the contract. Basically, what they're saying, you have to put this in writing for your current tenant for them to aware about the recent changes that has come to effect as of the 22nd of July 2022. So what they also say here, for a new rental, after the implementation date, you, the landlord or the agent, right, need to submit the written statement, which is the contract, 14 days of occupation under the contract, okay? Existing tenancy agreement will be automatically converted into occupation contract on the day the implementation come into effect. And landlord also, key, landlord are also required to have a maximum of 6 months to issue a written statement. Say, for example, your tenant has moved in, or you've got current tenant that are in your properties. So from the day the law comes into effect, you've got 6 months to actually update all your paperwork, all the written statements sent to them. If you're a new tenant, you need to give them a new written contract that allows them to actually have that agreement, okay? And also there's an option to either issue this written statement in a hard copy. If the contract holder, which is the tenant, agrees, you can also do it electronically by sending it via Yoti sign or something like that for them to sign and then return it back to you. And also what they've included in there also, if there is any issue in the property that makes the property not fit for human habitation, the tenant can actually choose not to pay you rent during that term. And you've got nowhere to go or to complain or to claim that money from. Okay, so again, you need to ensure your property is fit for human habitation in order for your tenant to actually pay you your rent completely. And also what they've also added now in Wales, basically back at the days in section 21, you are able to give your tenant 2 months notice to vacate your property. Now they've actually increased that to 6 months. So you can only give your tenant 6 months notice. Not just that, and you are not legally allowed to give them notice until they've stayed in your property for a minimum of 6 months. So what does this mean to the tenant, right? What is the benefit that our tenants are getting from this new law? Under the new law, tenant and licensee will become contract holders instead of tenants. Tenancy agreement will be replaced. The current tenancy agreement will be replaced by occupation contract. Okay, the benefit to the tenants in this whole thing, basically, they will be able to have security of tenure, basically. That's number one thing. And they would also be receiving a written contract setting out their responsibilities and the landlord's responsibility, right? And an increase in as I've just said, the second benefit to the tenant, as I've already said, an increase in no fault notice period from 2 months to 6 months. So basically, you're not allowed to give your tenant 2 month notice anymore or 1 month notice. It has to be 6 month notice, and that 6 month notice kicks in after they've lived in your property for 6 months. However, if there's any antisocial behavior or any criminal activities, you still have your right to actually repossess the property within I think it's about a month or 2 months for you to be able to get a property. However, if it's a worse antisocial behavior or criminal activities, you're able to repossess your property as soon as possible. And also the benefit the tenants get from this also is greater protection from eviction. So meaning you can not just turn around because they've asked you to do XYZ work and evict them from the property. So it allows them to stay there, as I said, minimum of 6 months for you to be able to ask them to leave. Another benefit also is improved succession right. This set out who, again, I'm reading this, bear with me, I'm just trying to get this right. And the other benefit also to the tenant basically is improved succession right. These set out who has the right to continue to live in a dwelling, for example, after the current tenant dies. So what they're trying to say here basically, if someone is living in a property, right, in the contract, they are allowed to have a name of someone who will take over the tenancy agreement when they passed away. So meaning if the tenancy agreement hasn't expired or they're still in tenancy agreement and you haven't given them notice or they haven't given you notice to leave, and if they sadly passed away, that tenancy agreement can be passed on to the person that they've included in that contract. And the other benefit to the tenant also is more flexibility agreement for, say for example, joint contract holders, which are now joint tenancy we used to call them. So it will now be called joint contract holders, making it easy to add and remove others to an occupancy contract. Say for example, this is what they're trying to help here, what they're trying to sort out here is basically if a couple take on a house and they had problems and they end up to move separately. So the current law right now basically, if one person moves, then that contract obviously is defaulted and you have to redo the contract. So now what they're saying is so if that happens in that situation, the tenancy still continues and the person that stays in the property have a right to add someone else in the tenancy agreement to continue living in that property. I will go more into this where they've explained it a bit better. So basically, if you're in a joint contract or joint tenancy agreement, as we usually call it, if you could easily add or remove someone from the contract without needing to end the contract and start another contract. This will make managing joint contract easier and help victims of domestic abuse by enabling them to actually separate with whoever is actually abusing them. So again, this is just to make it simpler for both people to actually leave the property. As and when they choose to do so. And also succession rights. So basically, even if your tenancy doesn't expire, right, and you don't want to live in that property, you could literally get someone to actually take on the property. Okay, and again, this talks about if you sadly passed away or if anything happens, you're allowed to actually pass that on to someone else. Again, if you're ending the contract, as I've told you earlier on, if there's any antisocial behavior, you can actually repossess your properties in this way. For example, if you wanted to end the contract, this is really for the landlord. Where the contract holder has breached the occupation contract, the minimum notice period that must be given is 1 month. This period can be shorter where it relates to a breach of antisocial behavior or serious rent arrears. So again, if you're collecting your rent in weekly basis, right, and the tenant is in arrears for over 8 weeks, you can actually give them a month notice, but again, you need to seek a court proceeding and all that sort of thing. And then again, but if it's antisocial behavior, you could give them straight notice, asking them to leave. Obviously, if they don't leave, then obviously you have to use the normal court procedure to evict them out of the property. And again, where there's no fault, right, and you want the tenants to move out, as I've already said, you would have to give them a minimum of 6 month notice for them to vacate the property. And if they're within the 6 months of their contract, you're not allowed to actually ask them to leave, basically. And again, as a landlord, this is the reason why it's very important for landlord to abide to all the rules and regulations. Very important. What they're saying here is, I'm going to read this so you to know the exact word they've said. A landlord will not be able to give such a notice unless they have complied with certain obligations, including registration and licensing with Rent Smart Wales and deposit protection rules. So basically, you have to be registered with Rent Smart Wales, following all the rules and regulations and ensuring that if you collected deposit from your tenant, those deposits are protected. What are my thoughts? I think this just unravels so many stuff. So For me personally, I think the fit for human habitation is a bit vague, as it doesn't stipulate what condition is not fit for human habitation, because we don't want to have this conflict with the tenant. Any minor issue, they turn around and say, oh, it's not fit for human habitation. So there should be somewhere in the actual agreement, or somewhere within the new changes, where it stipulates what can be not fit for human habitation, so both tenants and landlords know what these things are. And obviously it's very good also for security for both landlord and tenant. With what this means is basically, if the tenant moves in, she knows she's there, or he knows he's there for 12 months. So it brings that security, because obviously as a family or as a tenant, you want to ensure wherever you are living, you're living at least a minimum of 12 months, so you can call that place home. And also the benefit for landlords in this, you've got tenant there for 12 months, meaning once they've moved in, you have a tenant there that's not moving out, that is staying there, who knows their right and responsibilities. So again, I think it's a win-win looking at it that way. Okay, I think landlord will decide to sell, right? Because why they will decide to let's sell? Because there will be lots of administration issues, problem with tenant, especially tenants who are really wanting to take advantage. So some landlords have been in the game for a very long time. They just wouldn't have that time to deal with that sort of issue. So what they will decide to do basically is to sell their property. So I believe in Wales that there is a massive opportunity coming where landlords will just go and sell their properties and basically will retire from renting. I also think commercial lease would also increase, especially for people that are doing rent to rent. So what landlord would want, basically, they just want to deal with people professionally, where they will then hand that property over to you, will deal with all the other issues that may arise. So again, it's an opportunity for people that are interested in rent to rent deals, because landlords would be inclined to actually deal with these sort of people, because obviously then you would go then and sort all the legal requirements between you and your tenant. I think it would also stop rogue landlords taking advantage of vulnerable tenants, right? So some landlords, they don't look after the properties, they don't really care how the property looks like, they don't care the condition about it. So again, this sort of law really help the tenant in that situation, and obviously stop rogue landlords for taking advantages of tenants. I think this new law would also cause additional administration work, especially for agent who's got thousands of tenants. Imagine some agent got thousands of tenants. They would have to literally rewrite all those contracts, send all the written statements, and basically for them to be able to comply to this. So it's massive work. And landlords who literally used to use the old tenancy agreement would have to go and pay solicitors or letting agencies to actually give them the new occupation contract, because it will virtually be a different contract. Okay. And I also think tenants will take advantage and not pay their rent for small minor issue, right? Because what they will turn around and say, okay, the tap wasn't working, this wasn't working, so obviously it's not fit for purpose. During those periods that the landlord is trying to fix that issue, they can claim, they can choose not to pay rent during those time. Again, how do you know what is not deemed to be fit for human habitation? So again, that would cause lots of conflicts there with the tenant, agent, as well as landlord. It would be confusing. I personally think some tenants would take this as an advantage and obviously stop paying their rent and not actually report the issue for a few days or weeks to ensure they were able to claim that money back. Overall, I think it's a good idea they're changing the law, but I personally think it's skewed more towards the tenants. It literally favors the tenants a lot more than the actual landlord, because the only thing there for the landlord really is to be able to look after their property nicely. Personally, as a landlord, I would love to look after my properties nicely, but all the other stuff are just for the tenant basic. I also like the annual electrical inspection that they actually added in there, and again, that will just incur cost to the landlord and to the agent. And I also believe this would cause a rent increase as well, because all this administration thing that agent and landlords needs to do incurs costs, so that would be reflected on the rent as well, especially this annual electrical installation inspection. It's normally done every 5 years, but now if you have to do it annually, again, that's an additional cost to the landlord, which they would push onto the tenant. So I think overall it's a good idea to actually revamp the regulation, but it's more skewed to the tenant. So as an agent, landlord, and a property investor, I will just have to keep an eye to ensure I comply with the rules and regulation. And also I urge you to actually comply and follow the rules and regulation. If you're investing in Wales, what I will do basically, I will do your due diligence and learn about the rules and regulation in Wales, because it's not the same as England, Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland. So what it seems to happen now, basically, the laws in Wales would be different to the laws in England and to the laws in Scotland and Northern Ireland. So again, if you're deciding to invest in Wales, so I urge you to actually look into it. But what I'm going to do, actually, I will share the links so you can read the exact changes, so you know exactly what it is, what is the benefit to the tenant, what's the benefit to the landlord, as well as what are the pros and cons in both, so you can have a cup of coffee, sit down and read it, because it's a lengthy document. So it's important for you to read it and understand what the changes are. And again, I hope this episode has been really helpful. And if you like this episode or any of my episode, hit the like button below, subscribe to my channels for more of these amazing tutorials. I look forward to sharing the next video.